Tales from the trenches. Stories forged in the fires of experience. Many of us don't actually plan on being in HVAC. We just end up in the HVAC and refrigeration industry. To learn more about HVACR, visit escogroup.org. All right, thank you all for joining us. We're hanging out with Ranger Novrit. Ranger, how are you today?
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing good. We had a really interesting conversation when we were hanging out at the AHR Expo. Many times we talk about how we end up in this industry, and it's kind of funny when I start calculating the amount of friends that I have that ended up in the industry that didn't plan to be in the industry. It's pretty significant.
Yeah, it's funny how life, kind of molds your course.
Yeah.
I mean, you have some control over it, but sometimes I guess you could chalk it up to fate. Yeah.
I think the only people that I have that conversation with is say, oh yeah, I planned on spending my career in HVAC, were maybe the ones that started in an HVAC family-owned business. But the rest of us, we just end up there. So tell me a little bit about how you got in the industry, because I love this. This is just a prime example of how fascinating HVAC and refrigeration is, and how sometimes it just hooks us when we least expect it.
So way back in the day, when I was in high school, I really had no particular career path planned out. And my father, who was prior military, he had suggested that maybe the military would be something that would be in your interest.
Yeah.
And I agreed. And 2 weeks after I graduated high school, my father drove me down to Cape May, New Jersey, which is where the boot camp is for the United States Coast Guard.
Oh,
and he dropped me off and said, good luck.
Come back better, boy.
So made it through boot camp. Funny thing is, I actually enjoyed the experience, and I was fortunate enough to out of boot camp I was assigned to a ship, and when on the ship there's two different engineering divisions. One's called main prop, and the other one's called A-gang. And main prop basically works on anything in the engine room itself for propulsion, and A-gang works on everything else. They work on the air conditioning, all the steam,
HVAC, plumber, electrician.
Not so much plumber, but air conditioning, the steam kettles and equipment in the kitchen, the sewer system, any kind of auxiliary equipment we took care of.
Okay.
And as we discussed before, I had no prior knowledge as to how an air conditioning system worked or the refrigeration cycle or anything. My kind of thought in my head at the time was I wanted to be a heavy equipment operator and a mechanic. And I'm glad I didn't pick that
that piece of
course. Well, I mean, to be fair, when you're a young guy, you can lay on a concrete floor for hours, but as we get older, not that our industry isn't tough on our physical,
but some are definitely harder than some.
But anyway, so I fell into air conditioning just by that, and as we spoke, or the story I tell, and my first experience on the ship, I'm a young guy, I'm 17 years old.
Okay.
Right? And they took me aside and said, your first job is to go down, and I had to learn all this terminology because I knew nothing about nothing. So your first job on the ship is every morning when you get up, before you go to breakfast, you need to go down to dry stores, and we had one walk-in freezer and two walk-in refrigerators down there. And every morning my job was to go down, and they gave me a little wrench similar to this one, which I'll tell you the story about this as well. But they gave me a little crescent wrench like this.
Right.
And they said, Ranger, your job is to go down. Actually, they don't call you by your first name, Fireman Novrit.
Sure.
Your job is to go down, and they walked me up to one of the expansion valves that were mounted on the actually on the outside of the walk-in cooler, which is kind of odd too. But my job was to take the end nut off,
the cap,
and back the expansion valve out all the way, and count the turns. It's real important you count the turns. Back all the way out, and you could hear the moisture. Well, I was ice at that time. It would just let loose, right? and it's like, wow, that's weird.
That's interesting. What's this?
And then make sure you count the turns when you turn to 7.
Right.
Okay, whatever it was, 6 or 7 and a quarter.
Yeah.
And I did that religiously for about 6 weeks. And then another new guy showed up, and that now became his job.
Right, right.
And then they found something else for me to do.
Never really explained what you're doing. Just this is how
No,
you do it.
this is your job.
Right.
You know, and later on I realized, well, obviously the thing was full of moisture.
Exactly.
And you got to understand the mentality of the military is that they'll do things like this knowing that it's incorrect, but it gives somebody something to do, and maybe hopefully they understand why you're doing it.
Right, exactly.
So,
It's kind of like swabbing the deck. I mean,
obviously
the
right answer was to remove the moisture from the refrigerant and recharge it, right? But no, and then they wouldn't have a job for these young guys that come on the ship that have no idea about anything.
That's crazy. Yeah.
So that was my very, very first job in the industry. And then since then, I've learned a boatload of stuff about air conditioning, refrigeration on the ship. I had really good mentors on the ship, and they got me interested in it. And I kind of had an affinity for it. Mm-hmm. It's the first time in my life that I felt that it's something I understood.
You're part of something.
Yeah. But I understood it. I mean, I with dealing with engines and all that, and I did diesel work too, but I really understood it. I had it in my mind's eye, and I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. And just from there, I was on the ship for 18 months, and then they sent me down to Yorktown, Virginia. I went to A school, which is that kind of qualifies you for your job when you become a petty officer. And part of that, there was refrigeration and heating and air conditioning in that as well. Right.
So you got into the instructional side of it.
Well, no, I didn't get the instructional side. I got more training on it, more formal training. And then I decided not to make the military my career. I fell in love.
And boy, doesn't that change things.
Yes, it did. And I made a conscious decision that, that it wasn't going to be my career path. And I had made arrangements a year before I completed my enlistment obligation. And I signed up for air conditioning school in Pensacola, New Jersey, which at the time I believe it was Lions Tech, and then it was bought out by Lincoln Tech.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
And one of my personal friends growing up also was a student at that time at the school. That was Ed Genoa. So we actually, well, Ed and I have known each other since we were, almost just out of 10, 11 years old. Oh, and it's just funny that we all fell into this at the same time. So anyway, and then after that, I was gonna set the world on fire.
Yeah, exactly.
In the air conditioning industry. So, and here I am. This is my 41st year.
Holy cow!
So
you've seen a lot of changes along the way. I mean, from turning a wrench on an expansion valve to let the moisture pass through because it froze overnight probably in the metering device to diving deeper into what those devices are.
Oh my God. When I started, there was 4 refrigerants. It was 12, 502, 22, and 500. Those were the 4.
Exactly.
And that was the days of, purge and go. I mean, that's what it was, right, wrong, or different. And I also was fortunate enough to have a lot of great mentors in my career. I got to work, fortunately, under Jack Rice for 2 years. Mm-hmm. I had a really good service manager that we worked together in 2 different companies. His name was Jeff Crane, and he's the fella that, instilled in me, and this is in the mid to late 80s, you need to use micron gauge. You have to evacuate.
Best practices.
You got to use best practices. And that was instilled in me literally from the beginning, me leaving the military and starting out my career on the civilian side. So I was very, very fortunate to have those type of folks to be able to learn from them and work from them and instill that ethic.
It's interesting to recognize that we were, some of the industry was teaching best practices even then. A lot of people think about the old times ago, oh, you guys didn't do anything right. Well, it was a lot of emerging best practices and emerging best technologies. We were transitioning into a new era of refrigeration and air conditioning. And so a lot of times we weren't taught things maybe not properly. If we think about that whole mentoring side that you're talking about, A lot of people didn't have good mentors and good education early on in the industry, so a lot of bad habits were formed along the way. So you're fortunate to be able to have a mentor or some mentors along the way, which is what we're really trying to encourage, is for people to find mentors, find those people who are doing things right and just draw to them.
I mean, and I agree. I think that I know that all the things that we know today were around 40, 50 years ago.
New.
They were that was always there.
No.
It's just our industry, unfortunately, at least at that time, was an industry of shortcuts.
Yes.
All right, this is what we need to do, but what can I get away with, or what can cut my time down, or what can make get me out of the job faster? And a lot, unfortunately, however you want to look at it, those original the CFCs and the HFCs were pretty forgiving for a lot of things. So we got away with a lot of sins.
Yeah,
we really did as an industry.
Yep.
And now our industry is at the point, sophistication wise, where that's just not possible.
No, it's not allowable.
It's not. No, it's not. And I think that we're in for a very exciting time and a very challenging
It's
time.
going to be a challenging time. Yeah.
I mean, so I mean, I also am an instructor at Miles County Vocational. I teach the second year apprentice program. I've been doing it for about it's my 8th year, and I enjoy that too. That's one of the reasons I do it. I don't do it for the number one reason I do it. I just enjoy it, and I enjoy passing down everything that I've learned to some other folks. But I have what I call Ranger's 92-8 rule, and 8% of everyone, and you could probably apply this to anything in life, but 8% of the industry is right there. They're on top of things. They're constantly trying to improve themselves or trying to stay with everything. And then the bell curve after that, 92% falls off.
Yeah, you're right.
So my personal thing is I try to elevate that as any way I can. It's when I also, that part of my job role at where I work is, to bring my employees as well as my customers up to speed. And I'm like, guys, I'm here for you. This is what we know today. Take it for what it is. If you don't want to, adhere to what I'm saying, or you don't want to, that's fine. But I mean, you're gonna get left out.
Suffer the consequences. Yeah, it's exactly it.
It's just I was thinking about it the other day. I'm working really hard to try and come up with some stuff, 5,000 foot view with A2Ls. And one of the things I recommend is your programs, and there's a couple other ones that are great out there too. But you got to stay on top of this. It's still evolving.
It's an emerging part of our industry.
The refrigeration part of it is, if you've been doing what we discussed before, it's the no-brainer. It's not a big deal.
It's exactly right. It goes hand in hand with it if you're doing it right.
It's all the other stuff that we've never dealt with before that's still an unknown. It's still we got to stay on top of it, so when it comes time, that we're as prepared as we possibly can be.
Yeah. On our live show later today, we're actually going to be diving into R290, so A3 refrigerants and highly flammable refrigerants, and understanding how to work with those. And the funny thing is just like with A2Ls, it all comes back to, if you're already doing best practices, it's not going to change your life.
Correct. And somebody else, or there was on LinkedIn, there was somebody else that had posted something about A3s, and again, like I said, I had a lot of great mentors personally, and I had a lot of great mentors that I read about, guys like Gil Carlson and Dan Kramer and Jack Rise and all those folks. And Daniel Kramer, his family, if you don't know the background, is they were the family from Kramer Refrigeration, which is now Trenton Refrigeration.
Oh, okay, sure.
And Danny was an attorney, but he was also a mechanical engineer, and he wrote. He has papers out there from 40, 50 years ago trying to promote natural refrigerants.
Absolutely.
I mean, that far back. He's just like, this is the way the industry needs to go. And they were talking the 1960s, early 1970s.
Yep.
But he was, until he passed, he was always a proponent of natural refrigerants. So there's that part of the industry has always been out there. It's just a way to harness it and make it make sense.
Exactly. And that's what we're here for, is to help, bring these nuances up in forefront. We talk about like R290. We've been using R290 and other flammable refrigerants since the late 1800s. I mean, one of the reasons we came up with CFCs is to get away from the flammability. We seen this year in March in Europe, we seen most major manufacturers in Europe introducing R290 standalone heat pump air to water source units. So basically an outdoor heater slash chiller, right? For residential applications, using R290. We're going to see those here. We have a bunch of our manufacturers of refrigeration, commercial refrigerations already R290. We've been doing it for going on a decade now. So we're going to see a lot of emerging refrigerants, flammables, mildly flammables, everything in between, and making sure that we make these connections with mentors in the industry, people who are progressing and trying to do things right and using best practices are going to be the most important part of our success.
Yeah, and it's funny you mention that because, again, not to mention my friend Ed, but I will. We've had many discussions on this subject when we get together, and we still look at each other and go, "When is that going to happen?"
It's here.
I mean, there's other things too. There's CO2 out there. There's there's a lot of stuff going on in Europe that's pretty exciting that I try and keep my eye on.
I do too.
There's more than one way to proverbially skin a cat. So, and they're out there. So I think that short term, we had to do what we had to do in this country to conform. But I think in long term, I think there's a lot of things out there that need to be really looked at hard as future alternatives to what we're faced with now. So
absolutely, completely agree. All right, Roger, we sure appreciate your time. Love the conversations about getting into the industry, and look forward to reconnecting again sometime soon.
Absolutely. It was an honor and a privilege, and I'm glad we get to speak, and hopefully we'll see each other again soon.
Sounds good, my friend. Thank you for your time.
Have a great day, everyone.